Hello, my name is David Rubin. Thank you for visiting my website. Today, I'm going to talk, or in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about child support and how child support is determined in the state of Maryland. In the state of Maryland, we have what's called the Maryland Child Support Guidelines. Now, what is sort of deceiving to the everyday person that doesn't practice family law in Maryland is the word guideline, because it's really not a guideline in Maryland. It's pretty much mandatory the way they do it. About 30 years ago, our legislature determined that rather than have people, mothers and fathers, come into court and fight about what needs are necessary for each particular child in each particular case and how much the other person can afford to pay in child support, we would set these guidelines. And the reason they did that was because the courts were too crowded. Every case was being litigated, and it was very difficult for judges to figure that out. So Maryland looked at other states at the time who had implemented these guidelines, and they did the same. And for the most part, it's really, really helped over the years, because as lawyers, we can look at the numbers and we can tell you, this is what you're going to pay. Every now and then there's a certain situation, and I'll explain this to you in a minute, where it's not exactly what the guidelines might say it should be. But for the most part, we do what's called the Maryland Child Support Guidelines. The court is required to do the guidelines in every case. How do we calculate the guidelines? Well, there's a calculator. We call it a child support calculator. It's a computer program. It's called SASSyCalc. There's also one on the government website where you can Google Maryland Child Support Guideline Calculator and do it for free. But all the lawyers that do family law, or at least they should, and all the judges, they do, and the magistrates have what's called this SASSyCalc. It's a computer program. You put it up on the screen, and what does it ask for? Is it sole physical custody, or is it shared physical custody? How much money does mom make? How much money does dad make? Does either party pay child support for any other children that are not part of this relationship? Is either party paying alimony to the other? How much is daycare? How much is health insurance? Other factors that might be necessary to consider, sometimes transportation, it just depends. But basically, we take all those numbers, we put it into a computer formula, into a program, and boom, out comes the number. That's what the child support is going to be in almost all cases. That's called the child support guidelines. So when you come in, I'll literally sit with you in front of the computer screen and say, this is what it's going to be. And then somebody's going to say, but I can't afford that. That's not fair. How can they make me do that? And the answer most of the time is because it is what it is in Maryland. They don't really care about you. This is presumably based on what children need and what lifestyle they're entitled to live based on how much money you make. It does consider how much money you make and how much money your spouse makes. Now, we often litigate child support cases even though we have the Maryland Child Support Guidelines. Why do we do that? Well, because people disagree on how much money they make, perhaps. My husband's self-employed, or the father's self-employed. He doesn't report any of his income. What do? Well, we take other measures to try to prove how much he makes, but he lies about everything. We do the best we can. She's choosing not to work. How can we do that? That's not fair. We have something called voluntary impoverishment. Daycare's too expensive. Grandma never charged for daycare before, and now grandma's all of a sudden charging for daycare. So those are issues. While we still litigate child support cases, it's not nearly as much as it used to be. I've been doing this for 26 years. I've done hundreds of these cases, maybe thousands. And when you come into my office, I'll talk to you about that. I'll run the guidelines for you. We'll do our best to figure out the information, and we'll figure out what it could be. We take that in consideration. We also say, okay, well, we've got child support. What is alimony? What other property rights are there? Who's going to have the kids? In the next video, I'm going to be more detailed about what we call shared physical custody for child support purposes and sole physical custody for child support purposes. Stay tuned.